George Russell's 1:11.5 size 7 in SQ3 at Zandvoort didn't just secure sprint pole position, it actively stripped Kimi Antonelli and Lewis Hamilton of their best immediate chance to defend a championship lead that is already under severe pressure. By locking out the front row ahead of Lando Norris by exactly 0.04 of a second, Russell has forced both title rivals onto the back foot before the sprint race even begins, turning the qualifying session into a direct threat against a 50-point gap in the driver's standings. This wasn't a dominant display from start to finish, which makes the outcome even more dangerous for his competitors. He was not the fastest driver in SQ1. He was not the fastest driver in SQ2. Yet when the track evolved and the pressure peaked in the final segment, he produced a benchmark lap that nobody else on the grid could replicate, leaving his own teammate Kimi Antonelli 0.2 of a second adrift in 5th place and Hamilton stranded further back in 7th. The risk here is tangible and immediate. If Russell converts this specific, unrepeatable moment of peak performance into 8 sprint points, while his rivals are stuck fighting through traffic from P5 and P7, the psychological momentum of the 2026 season shifts violently right after a summer break where he desperately needed a reset. But here is the tension that nobody in the paddock can fully explain yet. We know the result and we know the gaps, but we do not actually know what changed inside the Mercedes garage between the second and third qualifying segments to unlock that specific 1/10.5 of pace. There is no confirmed telemetry data pointing to a setup adjustment. There is no verified mechanical explanation for why the car suddenly found a window that had been completely absent just minutes earlier. Russell himself admitted his confidence wasn't exactly at its highest before the session, citing a rough end to the first half of the year that included a first-lap retirement in Belgium and a disappointing P7 at the Hungaroring, yet he somehow delivered a flawless lap when the stakes were absolute. So what actually happened in those few minutes of downtime? Was it a sudden change in track conditions that only the Mercedes could exploit? Or was it something Russell did behind the wheel that defied the team's own pre-session expectations? Until we understand that missing variable, this pole position remains a ghost in the machine, a perfect lap with no technical fingerprint, and that uncertainty is exactly what makes it so threatening to everyone else on the grid. The fact that he beat Norris by 0.041 seconds, Leclerc by 0.55 seconds, and Piastri by 0.099 seconds tells us the execution was precise. But precision without explanation leaves every other engineer staring at blank screens, wondering if they missed something fundamental about how this new 2026 chassis behaves at Zandvoort. This isn't just about one lap time. It is about whether Russell has accidentally stumbled upon a performance sweet spot that could redefine the competitive balance for the rest of the sprint weekend. Or if this was simply a fleeting alignment of driver confidence and circuit evolution that will vanish as quickly as it appeared. The timing screens tell a story of deception that goes far beyond a single fast lap. Russell's 1:11.567 was a surgical strike delivered only after 60 minutes of calculated restraint, a tactical silence that masked his true potential until the exact moment it became impossible to counter. In SQ1 and SQ2, the Mercedes looked vulnerable, trailing the pacesetters and giving every rival team false hope that the W17 was struggling with the unique demands of this high-bank circuit. Lando Norris spent those early sessions believing he had the measure of the field, setting competitive times that suggested McLaren held the advantage heading into the final shootout. Then the clock reset for SQ3. Russell extracted everything from the tires in a single, uninterrupted rhythm that shaved 0.04 of a second off Norris's best effort, a margin so thin it represents less than 2 car lengths at Zandvoort's average speed but carries the weight of an entire sprint race strategy. He didn't just go faster. He went faster at the precise moment when tire temperatures, fuel loads, and track evolution aligned perfectly, exploiting a window that existed for perhaps 90 seconds before closing again. This is where the numbers get brutal. 0.041 seconds. That is the difference between starting on the clean side of the grid with clear air ahead and starting second with dirty air and a compromised first corner approach at a track where overtaking is notoriously difficult. Charles Leclerc missed out by another 0.14 seconds behind Norris, meaning the top 3 were separated by barely half a tenth, yet only one driver had managed to hide his hand until the final roll of the dice. Oscar Piastri trailed Leclerc by 0.044 seconds, confirming that even the second McLaren couldn't match the late session surge that Russell produced. Why does this pattern matter so much? Because in the volatile 2026 regulation cycle, teams are still learning how these new chassis respond to micro-adjustments in real time, and a driver who can extract peak performance without showing it earlier demonstrates a level of car mastery that telemetry alone cannot teach. The fact that Russell wasn't fastest until SQ3 suggests he was managing something deliberately, whether that was tire preservation, engine modes, or simply building personal confidence through incremental laps rather than burning resources early. He stayed quiet, then he struck. Nobody expected it. This approach directly contradicts the modern qualifying philosophy where teams typically want to establish psychological dominance as early as possible, yet Russell's patience paid dividends that aggression might have squandered. Formula 1. Calm described him as charging to pole, but that word implies sustained pressure throughout the session, which isn't what happened here. What actually occurred was a controlled detonation of pace, reserved entirely for the moment when track conditions offered maximum grip and minimum traffic. The McLarens looked quick all afternoon. The Ferraris showed consistent sector times. But consistency across 3 segments is not the same as peak execution in one, and Russell understood that distinction better than anyone else in the garage. His third sprint pole of the 2026 season wasn't earned through raw speed alone. It was earned through strategic timing that turned a mediocre qualifying session into a defining moment. So where does that leave us right now? We have a pole sitter whose pace remains partially unexplained, a rival field that was caught off guard, and a sprint race grid that rewards the driver who knew exactly when to stop hiding and start pushing. Zoom out for a second and picture the mental weight of walking into a high-speed weekend knowing your last 2 race outings ended in disaster, because that is the invisible backdrop against which this Zandvoort performance must be measured. This wasn't just another qualifying session for Russell, it was a psychological reckoning with a summer break haunted by a first-lap retirement at Spa-Francorchamps and a lonely P7 finish at the Hungaroring just 1 week later. Those results weren't merely poor outcomes on a scoreboard, they were compounding failures that eroded momentum right before the mandatory shutdown, leading him to spend weeks replaying mistakes instead of building confidence. Sky Sports captured this emotional arc perfectly when Russell admitted it was a tough end to the first half of the year and expressed genuine relief at coming back strong, words that carry far more gravity when you understand the specific wreckage he was climbing out of. The bounce-back narrative isn't media spin, it is documented reality backed by consecutive weekends where nothing went right followed immediately by a flawless execution under maximum pressure. He found his rhythm. The car responded. Doubt vanished. That sequence of short certainties stands in stark contrast to the uncertainty that defined his pre-break form, where setup changes failed to translate to lap time and strategic calls couldn't salvage compromised races. At Zandvoort, the opposite happened. Every adjustment landed, every sector time validated the team's direction, and the driver who had been questioning his own instincts suddenly looked like the version of himself that wins championships. Com's dedicated follow-up article noted that Russell conceded his confidence wasn't exactly at its highest before the session, a rare admission of vulnerability from a driver who typically projects unshakable self-belief in public. That honesty makes the SQ3 pole infinitely more significant, because it proves the performance wasn't born from arrogance or assumed superiority, but from deliberate reconstruction of trust between driver and machine. The 111. 567 wasn't just fast. It was restorative, serving as tangible proof that the Belgium DNF and Hungary struggle were anomalies rather than symptoms of deeper decay. What does this mean for the championship fight moving forward? It means Russell enters the sprint race not as a wounded contender trying to stop the bleeding, but as a driver who has already proven he can extract peak performance from the Mercedes even when his internal barometer reads low. The race treated this pole explicitly as a genuine bounce-back story in their winners and losers analysis, recognizing that narrative context matters as much as raw pace when evaluating competitive trajectories. A driver recovering from back-to-back disappointments could easily have played it safe, settled for a conservative top 5 start, and focused on damage limitation. Instead, Russell attacked the limit precisely when caution would have been forgiven. That choice reveals something about his competitive psychology that no telemetry trace can capture, the willingness to risk further failure in pursuit of redemption, trusting that the same commitment which caused pain in Belgium could also produce glory in the Netherlands. So what we're seeing now is the foundation being rebuilt in real time, lap by lap, with each sector serving as evidence that the rough patch was temporary and the underlying talent remains intact. Go back to that opening line about Russell's lap actively stripping Kimi Antonelli of his best chance to defend a championship lead, because the 82.7-second gap between the two Mercedes drivers in SQ3 is the exact mechanical proof of that stake playing out in real time. Antonelli didn't simply lose pace to his teammate due to driver error or setup misjudgment. He was physically compromised by floor damage sustained during an excursion at the penultimate corner in SQ1, a single mistake that cascaded into a qualifying deficit no amount of talent could overcome in the remaining sessions. That damaged floor altered the car's aerodynamic platform for every subsequent lap, reducing downforce and destabilizing the rear axle through Zandvoort's high-speed banking sections where mechanical grip is non-negotiable. While Russell was hiding his true pace and waiting for the perfect SQ3 window, Antonelli was fighting a wounded car, trying to extract performance from a machine that had lost a critical percentage of its designed efficiency before the final segment even began. The result was P5 on the sprint grid, a starting position that forces him into immediate defensive mode against rivals who suffered no such mechanical penalty. Damage lingered, pace dropped, points slipped away. Those three consequences are inseparable from the physical reality of what happened at turn 13 in SQ1, transforming what should have been an intra-team battle for pole into a demonstration of how fragile competitive balance can be under the new 2026 regulations. Antonelli entered this weekend as championship leader, yet he qualified nearly a quarter second behind the teammate he's supposed to be matching, a gap that directly reflects the cost of that early session excursion rather than any fundamental speed differential. Sky Sports emphasized this title rival angle explicitly, noting that both Antonelli and Hamilton were left on the back foot relative to Russell's pole, but only Antonelli had to contend with structural damage that made recovery mathematically improbable. The FIA's own news channel corroborated the top order without mentioning the floor issue, which means casual viewers watching official coverage might miss entirely why the championship leader looked so uncompetitive in the final moments of qualifying. This isn't speculation about hidden problems, it is confirmed mechanical cause and effect documented in the session reports. So, what does this mean for the sprint race itself? Starting from P5 with a damaged floor puts Antonelli in the impossible position of needing to overtake cars that are aerodynamically cleaner, while managing a chassis that no longer produces its intended downforce levels. Every pass attempt will demand more tire degradation, every defensive maneuver will expose the compromised rear stability, and every lap spent in traffic will compound the disadvantage created 60 minutes earlier in SQ1. Russell, meanwhile, starts from clean air with a fully intact car and the psychological momentum of having just delivered his third sprint pole of the season against a teammate who cannot currently match his equipment's potential. The championship implications are severe if Antonelli cannot recover positions despite leading the standings by 50 points over Hamilton, and Russell converts his front row start into maximum sprint points. The gap between first and third in the Drivers' Championship could shrink dramatically before Sunday's Grand Prix even begins.